The sound of a heavy steel deadbolt sliding into place is something you never really forget. It isn't a click. It's a harsh, grinding scrape of metal on metal, followed by a dull, final thud that echoes in your chest. I was 28 years old when I closed my hand around the rusted iron latch of the storm bunker beneath our family's cabin in the Cascade Mountains. I pulled it shut. I slid the bolt home, and on the other side of that reinforced steel door were my parents. The people who gave me life. The father who had built that very foundation with his own bare hands, and the mother whose asthma was already acting up from the damp mountain air. If you are a mother, if you have ever looked at your child sleeping in their crib and thought, I would do anything for you, and I know you will grow up to be a good person, then what I am about to tell you will break your heart. Because my mother thought the same thing about me, and I betrayed her. I betrayed them both for a man who did not love me, for a life that was nothing but a hollow lie. I am telling you this because I need you to know how easily the devil can wear a tailored suit, and how quickly a daughter's love can be weaponized against the very people who raised her. It started with my husband, Marcus. When I met Marcus 5 years ago, he seemed like the answer to every prayer a young woman didn't even know she was praying. He was a commercial investment broker in Seattle. He was sharp, charismatic, and commanded a room simply by walking into it. He drove a pristine black luxury sedan, wore watches that cost more than my first car, and looked at me like I was the only thing in the world that mattered. I was young, naive, and completely blinded by the blinding light of his ambition. We had a beautiful wedding. My parents paid for a significant portion of it. I remember my father, Robert, standing at the edge of the reception hall, his calloused hands awkwardly holding a crystal champagne flute. My dad was a retired structural engineer. He was a man of few words, a man who believed in measuring twice and cutting once, a man who trusted concrete and steel more than he trusted charming smiles. He didn't say much about Marcus that night, only gave me a tight hug and whispered, "If the foundation isn't solid, Chloe, the house will eventually fall." I thought he was just being his usual overly cautious self. I didn't realize he was predicting my entire future. By our 3rd year of marriage, the foundation was crumbling. The economy shifted, interest rates spiked, and the brilliant real estate deals Marcus constantly bragged about started to dry up. But Marcus didn't know how to downsize his ego. We kept the luxury apartment downtown. We kept the leasing on the cars. We kept going to the expensive dinners. Then the late-night phone calls started. I would wake up at 2 in the morning to find Marcus standing on the balcony, speaking in hushed, frantic tones. When I asked him what was wrong, he would smile that polished smile of his and tell me it was just cash flow friction. He made me feel stupid for worrying. He used big financial terms to build a wall around his secrets. But the secrets eventually bled through the walls. 6 months ago, I found a collection notice hidden in the bottom of his golf bag. We weren't just in debt, we were drowning. We were hundreds of thousands of dollars in the red. When I confronted him, he broke down. He cried. He fell to his knees, wrapped his arms around my waist, and played the victim perfectly. He told me he was only trying to provide the life I deserved. He told me that if we couldn't come up with a massive injection of capital, we would lose everything: the cars, the apartment, our reputation. He said he might even face legal trouble for how he had shuffled money around to cover his tracks. I was terrified, and in my terror, Marcus planted the seed. "Your parents' lodge, Chloe," he murmured one night, tracing the line of my jaw in the dark. "It's sitting on 3 acres of prime, unrestricted mountain land in the Cascades. Developers are paying premium cash for lots like that right now. $2 million, easily, maybe more." I pulled away, horrified. "That's their home, Marcus. My dad built that house from the ground up." "And look at them now," he countered, his voice dripping with synthetic sympathy. "Your dad is 65. His knees are going. Your mom, Martha. Chloe, her asthma was so bad last Thanksgiving she could barely walk up the porch steps. They are isolated up there. It takes 40 minutes just to get to a decent hospital. It's dangerous for them to live in a 2-story log cabin in the middle of nowhere." "They love that house," I argued, though my voice was shaking. "They love you more," he whispered, pulling me back against his chest. "If we sell the property, we can clear the debt. We can buy them a beautiful, safe, single-story condo down here in Seattle, close to us, close to the doctors. We'd be saving them, Chloe, and they'd be saving us. It's the only logical step." He didn't present it as a theft. He presented it as a rescue mission. He painted a picture of my parents as frail, helpless seniors who needed their capable daughter and son-in-law to step in and make the hard choices for their own good. He preyed on my anxiety for their health, twisting my love for them into a justification for his greed. For weeks, he wore me down. He brought home brochures for luxury assisted living condos. He showed me charts of our dwindling bank accounts. He made me feel like if I didn't do this, I was not only destroying my marriage, but I was also recklessly endangering my aging parents by letting them stay in the mountains. Finally, broken and exhausted, I agreed to talk to them. I agreed to drive up to the lodge for a long weekend and pitch the idea of them moving. Marcus said he would prepare some basic financial projection papers, just to show them the math. We drove up the winding mountain roads on a Thursday afternoon. The sky was the color of bruised iron, heavy and ominous. The weatherman on the radio warned of an unseasonable, brutal blizzard moving in from the coast, urging everyone in the upper elevations to prepare for power outages and isolation. The lodge came into view through the towering pine trees, looking exactly as it had for my entire life. It was massive, beautiful, and utterly imposing. My father had designed it to withstand anything nature could throw at it. The logs were thick, the roof was pitched perfectly to shed snow, and underneath it all, dug deep into the bedrock, was the storm bunker. My dad had built it during the paranoia of the late 80s, a reinforced concrete room meant to keep his family safe from tornadoes, storms, or whatever else the world might hurl our way. My mother, Martha, was waiting on the porch. She was wrapped in a thick wool shawl, her silver hair pulled back, waving eagerly despite the biting wind. The moment I stepped out of the car, she wrapped her arms around me. She smelled of cinnamon and vanilla, the smell of my childhood. But as she hugged me, I heard the faint, wet wheeze in her chest. Marcus heard it too. He shot me a look over her shoulder. "See?" his eyes said. "She's sick. We are doing the right thing." My father walked out a moment later. He didn't hug Marcus. He simply offered a firm, calloused hand. "Robert," Marcus said, flashing his $1,000,000 smile. "Good to see you. Looks like we brought the weather with us." "Storm's coming in fast," my dad said, looking past Marcus at the darkening sky. His voice was deep, gravelly. "I checked the generator this morning. We have enough diesel for a week and plenty of dry wood. We'll be fine." That evening, the atmosphere in the house was suffocating. The wind began to howl outside, battering the thick log walls, but the real storm was inside. We sat around the massive oak dining table my father had carved himself. Martha served a pot roast, chatting happily about her garden and the local town gossip. Marcus played the part of the devoted son-in-law perfectly. He poured her wine. He complimented her cooking. He asked my father respectful, polite questions about the structural integrity of the roof under heavy snow. But I couldn't eat. My stomach was tied in knots. The leather briefcase Marcus had brought inside sat by the front door like a ticking time bomb. I kept waiting for him to bring up the condo, the debt, the plan, but he didn't. He just smiled, drank his wine, and let the evening pass. Around midnight, my parents went up to bed. The house was entirely silent, save for the violent shrieking of the wind against the windows. Marcus kissed my forehead, told me he was going to take a quick shower, and headed to our guest room. I couldn't sleep. The anxiety was vibrating in my bones. I walked out to the living room, the glowing embers in the stone fireplace casting long, dancing shadows across the floor. My eyes landed on Marcus's leather briefcase. He had told me he brought basic financial projections. Spreadsheets, just numbers to show my dad. But a nagging, awful feeling gnawed at the back of my mind. My father's voice echoed in my head. If the foundation isn't solid, the house will eventually fall. I knelt beside the briefcase. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely work the brass clasps. I popped them open. The leather parted. Inside, there were no spreadsheets. There were no brochures for luxury condos in Seattle. Instead, I pulled out a thick stack of legal documents with crisp blue covers. My breath hitched in my throat as I read the bold lettering at the top of the first page. Durable power of attorney, full financial and medical authority. Below it, my name was listed as the agent, and my parents' names were listed as the principals. But there was a secondary agent listed, Marcus. I flipped the page, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. The next document was a quitclaim deed, completely filled out, transferring the ownership of the mountain lodge directly to an LLC that I knew Marcus controlled. But the third document is what made the blood freeze in my veins. It was an intake application and a signed commitment form for a state-run minimum care nursing facility 3 counties over. It wasn't a luxury condo. It was a bleak, cinder-block institution for wards of the state. Marcus wasn't planning on asking my parents to sell. He wasn't planning on using the money to buy them a nice place near us. He was planning to declare them legally incompetent. He was planning to use my mother's asthma and my father's age against them. He was going to seize their assets, dump them in a miserable, underfunded facility, and liquidate this beautiful home to pay off his gambling and business debts. And he had manipulated me into bringing him here to execute the trap. I dropped the papers. They scattered across the hardwood floor. Looking for something, sweetheart? I spun around. Marcus was standing in the hallway shadow. He wasn't wearing a towel. He was fully dressed in his sweater and jeans, his arms crossed over his chest. The charming, loving husband was completely gone. The man looking at me had eyes like dead black glass. "Marcus," I choked out, pointing a trembling finger at the papers. "What is this? This isn't what we talked about. A state facility? Power of attorney? You lied to me." He stepped into the dim light of the embers. He didn't look apologetic. He looked annoyed. "I protected you from the ugly details, Chloe. That's what a husband does," he said smoothly, walking toward me. "Your father is a stubborn old mule. You think he's going to voluntarily hand over the deed to this place because we asked nicely? You think he's going to listen to reason? No, we have to force his hand." Force his hand? I stepped back. By taking away their freedom? By dumping them in a home? "Marcus, I won't do it. I'm not signing any of this. We are leaving tomorrow morning." Marcus stopped. He tilted his head, studying me. Then he let out a short, cold laugh. "We aren't leaving, Chloe, and you are going to help me get those signatures tomorrow." "Or what?" I challenged, trying to find a courage I didn't feel. He closed the distance between us in 2 terrifyingly fast strides. He grabbed my upper arm, his fingers digging into my flesh hard enough to bruise. He leaned in close, his breath warm against my ear. "Or," he whispered venomously, "I go to the feds. The money I shuffled around, the fraudulent loans. I didn't just forge my name, Chloe. I forged yours, too. On all of it. If I go down for embezzlement and fraud, you are coming right down with me. You'll spend the next 10 years in a federal women's prison. And what do you think that will do to your frail mother's heart?" The room spun. The floor seemed to drop out from beneath me. He had framed me. My own husband had set me up as his human shield. "You're a monster," I sobbed quietly, terrified of waking my parents upstairs. "I'm a survivor," he corrected, letting go of my arm and giving my cheek a condescending pat. "And so are you. Tomorrow, you are going to sit at that table, and you are going to tell your father that his mind is slipping. You are going to tell him that for Mother's health, he needs to sign these papers, or you will petition the court to take custody of them. You play the concerned daughter, or we both lose everything." He bent down, calmly gathered the papers from the floor, and placed them back in the briefcase. He locked it with a sharp click. "Go to sleep, Chloe. Tomorrow is a big day." He walked back to the bedroom, leaving me alone in the dark, listening to the storm raging outside. But the storm outside was nothing compared to the nightmare I was trapped in. I was cornered. If I protected my parents, I would go to prison, my life ruined, my reputation destroyed. If I saved myself, I would be condemning the 2 people who loved me most to a miserable end. I sat on the floor, burying my face in my hands, crying until I had no tears left. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know who I had become. The next morning, the blizzard hit with full, devastating force. When I came downstairs, the world outside the windows was a swirling wall of white. The wind shrieked like a dying animal. The temperature had plummeted. My father was standing by the large bay window, a mug of black coffee in his hand, staring out at the snow. His posture was rigid, his shoulders squared. He looked like a general surveying a battlefield. Marcus was sitting at the dining table. The briefcase was open. The papers were laid out neatly on the wood. He was drinking tea, looking perfectly relaxed. "Morning, Chloe," Marcus said brightly. My mother emerged from the kitchen, carrying a plate of toast. She looked tired. The dark circles under her eyes were heavy, and her breathing sounded shallower than the day before. The drop in barometric pressure always wreaked havoc on her lungs. "Sit down, sweetheart," she said, giving me a warm, tired smile. Eat something. I couldn't look at her. I sat in the chair opposite Marcus. I felt physically sick. My father turned away from the window. He walked over to the table and looked down at the neatly arranged documents. He didn't sit. He stood tall, looming over Marcus. "What's this, Marcus?" my father asked. His voice was completely devoid of emotion. It was the voice of an engineer inspecting a stress fracture. Marcus cleared his throat, putting on his mask of deep, agonizing concern. "Robert, Chloe and I have been talking. We've been very worried about you and Martha. The isolation up here. Martha's health. It's getting to be too much for you to manage." My dad didn't blink. "We manage fine." "Dad?" I croaked. My voice sounded hollow. Marcus shot me a warning look beneath the table. "Do it," his eyes commanded. "Say the lines." "Dad," I forced myself to continue, feeling my soul rotting with every word. "Mom was struggling just walking up the steps yesterday. If there's an emergency out here, if she has a severe attack in this weather, the ambulance would never make it. We just want you to be safe." My mother sat down slowly, looking between me and my father. "Chloe, honey, we're okay. Your father takes wonderful care of me." "It's not enough anymore, Martha," Marcus interjected smoothly. He tapped the top document. "This is a power of attorney and a deed transfer. We want to take over the burden of the property. We have a wonderful facility lined up where you can both get the round-the-clock medical care you need. We're doing this out of love." My father reached out and picked up the deed transfer. He pulled a pair of reading glasses from his flannel shirt pocket, slid them onto his nose, and read. The silence in the room was deafening. The only sound was the howling wind and the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. After a long minute, my father set the paper back down. He took off his glasses. He looked at Marcus. "This transfers the property to an LLC, not to Chloe," my father stated. "For tax purposes," Marcus lied without missing a beat. "And the facility you mentioned," my father continued, his voice dropping an octave. "I saw the header on the 3rd page. That is a state-subsidized ward. It is not a medical facility. It is a warehouse for the destitute." My mother gasped, pressing a hand to her mouth. "A state ward? Chloe, is that true?" I looked down at my lap. I couldn't bear to meet her eyes. Tears were streaming down my face. I was paralyzed by the fear of prison, by the absolute control Marcus had over me. I said nothing. My silence was my confession. My father's face hardened into granite. The stoic, quiet man was gone. In his place was a protector, fiercely angry and entirely focused. "Get out," my father said to Marcus. Marcus stood up, feigning indignation. "Robert, be reasonable. You are not thinking clearly. This is exactly why Chloe needs to take over. You are endangering your wife." "I said get out of my house," my father boomed. It was a terrifying sound, a roar that seemed to shake the very floorboards. "You can't kick us out in a blizzard," Marcus shot back, dropping the polite act. His face flushed red with anger. "And you aren't listening. If you don't sign these voluntarily, Chloe will petition the state. We will have you declared unfit. You'll lose the house to the courts, and you'll end up with nothing." "You arrogant little punk," my father said, taking a step toward Marcus. "You come into the house I built. You threaten my wife. You manipulate my daughter." Suddenly the lights flickered. Once, twice, and then, with a heavy, dying hum, the entire house plunged into pitch-black darkness. The power grid had failed. The blizzard had taken down the lines. The silence that followed was suffocating. "Stay calm," my father's voice cut through the dark, authoritative and steady. "The generator should kick in automatically in 10 seconds. We waited. 10 seconds passed. 20. A minute. Nothing. "The transfer switch must be frozen," my father said. I could hear him moving toward the kitchen drawers to get a flashlight. The beam clicked on, cutting through the gloom. "I have to go down to the bunker to manually override the generator circuit." He turned the light toward my mother. She was breathing heavily, her chest rising and falling in rapid, shallow jerks. The stress of the argument, combined with the sudden cold seeping into the unheated house, was triggering a severe asthma attack. "Martha, where is your emergency inhaler?" my dad asked urgently. "Upstairs, on the nightstand," she wheezed, gripping the edge of the table. "Chloe," my dad barked, treating me like a soldier rather than a daughter in that moment. "Go upstairs. Get your mother's inhaler. Bring it down to the bunker. I'm taking her down there now. The bunker is insulated. It will hold the heat longer, and I need to get the power back on so her nebulizer can run." I nodded numbly, turning and sprinting blindly toward the stairs. I heard my father guiding my mother toward the kitchen pantry, where the heavy steel door to the underground storm bunker was hidden behind a false wall of shelving. I raced up the stairs in the dark, my hands frantically searching my parents' bedroom until my fingers brushed the plastic casing of the inhaler. I grabbed it and ran back down. When I reached the kitchen, the heavy steel door of the bunker was propped open. The concrete stairwell leading down into the earth was illuminated by the faint glow of my father's flashlight at the bottom. Marcus was standing at the top of the stairs, right inside the kitchen. He wasn't moving to help. He was just staring down into the dark. As I ran toward the door, inhaler in hand, Marcus suddenly moved. He stepped into the doorway, blocking my path. "Marcus, move!" I panicked. "Mom needs this." He looked at me. The emergency flashlight on his phone was on, casting ghoulish shadows up his face. There was a sickening, calculated calm in his eyes. "They're both down there, Chloe," he whispered over the howling wind outside. "I know. Move!" I pushed against his chest, but he grabbed my wrists, holding them in a vice grip. "Listen to me," he hissed, his voice dropping to a dangerous manic register. "The generator is down there. The food is down there. They are trapped in a concrete box." I stared at him, my brain struggling to process his words. "What are you talking about?" He stepped backward, pulling me out of the doorway and into the kitchen. He reached out and grabbed the edge of the heavy steel bunker door. "If we shut this door," Marcus said softly, "they can't get out. We leave them down there. We take the truck. We drive into town. We tell the sheriff the storm hit, the power went out, and they panicked and locked themselves in the bunker, but the latch jammed from the inside. We played the grieving, horrified family. By the time they dig them out, it will be too late. The cold and her asthma will do the work for us." Bile rose in my throat. He wasn't just talking about stealing their home anymore. He was talking about murder. "No!" I gasped, violently trying to rip my hands away. "No, you're insane! I won't let you!" "You don't have a choice," he snarled, slamming me against the kitchen counter. He leaned his entire weight against me, the cold metal of the sink pressing into my spine. "If they come up from that basement, Robert is calling his lawyers. He's calling the cops. The gig is up, Chloe. He will destroy me, and when I go down, I am taking you with me. 10 years in prison. Your life is over." "I don't care," I screamed, crying hysterically. "Let me go." "Think about it," he roared, shaking me. "We walk away clean. You inherit the house free and clear as the only child. No deeds, no state facilities, no messy court battles. We sell the land, we pay the debts, and we are free. You just have to close the door." "Chloe?" My father's voice echoed up from the concrete stairwell. "Chloe, hurry. She can't breathe." My mother's ragged, terrifying gasps echoed from the dark below. It sounded like she was drowning in the air. "Give me the inhaler," Marcus demanded, prying my fingers open. "No!" I kicked at him, but he was too strong. He wrenched the small plastic tube from my hand and threw it across the dark kitchen. It clattered under the refrigerator, completely out of reach. "Now," Marcus said, grabbing me by the back of the neck and shoving me toward the heavy steel door. "Do it. You push it shut. You slide the bolt." "I won't." He leaned in, his lips brushing my ear. "If you don't do it right now, I will drag you down those stairs. I will break your father's neck myself, and I will tell the cops you did it in a panic over the inheritance. Who do you think they'll believe? The broke daughter or the successful broker husband who has paper trails showing you've been forging documents?" I froze. My mind snapped. The sheer terror, the psychological abuse, the fear of prison, the agonizing sound of my mother choking for air below. It all compressed into a single blinding moment of sheer panic. I looked down into the dark stairwell. I couldn't see them. I could only hear them. "Chloe?" my dad called out again. There was no anger in his voice now, only fear for his wife. "Where are you?" Marcus's hand tightened on my neck. "Do it," he hissed, "or you're dead." I reached out, my trembling fingers wrapped around the cold iron latch of the heavy door. I closed my eyes, tears streaming down my face, begging God to strike me dead right there on the kitchen floor. I pushed the door. It swung on its heavy, oiled hinges. It slammed shut with a definitive booming thud that seemed to shake the house. "Good girl," Marcus whispered. Now the bolt. I grabbed the heavy exterior deadbolt. I pulled it across the track. Scrape. Thud. The sound of a heavy steel deadbolt sliding into place is something you never really forget. I collapsed onto the kitchen floor, sobbing uncontrollably, burying my face in my knees. I had done it. I had locked my own parents in a freezing concrete tomb to suffocate in the dark. I had chosen a monster over the people who loved me. Marcus didn't comfort me. He didn't even look at me. He simply walked over to the kitchen island, picked up the bottle of red wine from the night before and poured himself a glass in the dark. "Pack your bag," he said casually, taking a sip. "As soon as the snowplows clear the main highway, we're going back to Seattle. We have a funeral to plan." For the first hour, the only sound in the dark kitchen was the relentless, shrieking assault of the blizzard against the log walls and the rhythmic clink of Marcus setting his wine glass down on the granite island. I remained curled in a tight ball on the freezing hardwood floor, my forehead pressed against the baseboards. I was waiting for the sounds from below. I was waiting for the muffled, desperate pounding of my father's fists against the reinforced steel. I was waiting for the agonizing, breathless cries of my mother. But there was nothing. Total, suffocating silence from the bunker. "Get up, Chloe," Marcus said casually, pouring himself a second glass. "Stop acting like a martyr. It's done. In a few days, the storm will break, the plows will clear the pass, and we'll be the grieving, horrified children who survived a tragic power failure." I slowly lifted my head. My eyes had adjusted to the dark. I could see his silhouette, relaxed, victorious. He pulled a thick, black satellite phone from the inner pocket of his coat. He had brought it just in case the mountain cell towers went down. Now I realized it was so he could coordinate the sale of my parents' graveyard before their bodies were even cold. "I'm going to call Peterson," Marcus muttered, referring to his sleazy real estate partner back in Seattle. "Tell him to start drafting the preliminary listing quietly. Once the deed transfers to the LLC, we can fast-track the closing." He extended the thick antenna of the satellite phone and dialed. He held it to his ear. He waited. He frowned. He pulled the phone away, staring at the glowing green screen. "No signal," he muttered, irritated. He walked toward the massive bay window in the living room, holding the phone up higher. "Damn storm is too thick." He paced back to the kitchen, his irritation growing. He reached over and picked up the house's landline receiver mounted on the wall. He listened. "Dead," he snapped, slamming it back into the cradle. "Of course. The lines are probably under 3 feet of snow." He turned to me, the polite veneer completely stripped away, revealing the jittery, indebted addict underneath. "Where does your old man keep the emergency router, the one connected to the radio tower?" I didn't answer. I just stared at the heavy steel door of the bunker, wishing it would swing open and swallow me whole. "Chloe, look at me when I'm talking to you," Marcus barked, taking a step toward me. But before his foot could hit the floor, a sound shattered the heavy silence of the cabin. Crack. Hiss. It wasn't a sound from outside. It came from the corner of the ceiling. The battery-powered smart home intercom speaker, part of an integrated PA system my father had installed years ago to broadcast music throughout the massive house, suddenly crackled to life. There was a burst of static, followed by the clear, calm, and utterly terrifying sound of a man clearing his throat. "Marcus," my father's voice echoed through the dark living room, amplified and crystal clear. "If you are looking for a signal, you are wasting your time. I engaged the electromagnetic dampener from the main breaker panel. Nothing is getting in or out of the airspace of this house." Marcus froze, his wine glass halfway to his mouth. The color drained from his face so fast he looked like a ghost in the dim ambient light. "Dad?" I whispered, my voice cracking. "I'm here, Chloe." His voice came through the speaker, steady, deep, and without a trace of the panic I had expected. "Your mother is right beside me, and she is breathing just fine." "How?" Marcus stammered, backing away from the intercom speaker as if it might reach out and grab him. "The power is out. The generator is dead." "The main house generator is disabled," my father corrected, the calm precision of a structural engineer dripping from every syllable, "because I disabled it remotely. But the bunker, Marcus, is not just a root cellar. It's a Category 5 panic room. I built it in 1988, updated it in 2015, and finalized the climate control systems last year." I sat up, my hands trembling. The heavy steel door wasn't a trap. It was a shield. "Down here," my father continued smoothly, We have an independent, battery-banked geothermal heating system. We have emergency rations for 3 months. We have a medical fridge stocked with enough albuterol, steroids, and backup nebulizers to keep your mother comfortable for a year. The temperature is currently a balmy 72 degrees. A sound escaped Marcus's throat, something between a growl and a whimper of pure disbelief. He rushed to the steel door, grabbing the deadbolt I had thrown. He yanked it back, throwing his weight against the heavy iron handle, desperately trying to pull the door open. It didn't budge. "Don't bother," my father's voice echoed, almost sounding amused. The moment Chloe slid the exterior bolt, it triggered the internal lockdown mechanism. 4 titanium pneumatic deadbolts fired into the concrete frame from the inside. A SWAT team with C4 couldn't open that door right now, let alone a broker with soft hands. "You arrogant old bastard!" Marcus screamed at the speaker, slamming his fists against the impenetrable steel. "You think you've won? You're trapped down there. The storm will bury this house. No one is coming for you." "That is where you are wrong again, Marcus," my father replied. The tone shifted from calm to remarkably cold. It was the voice of a man delivering a death sentence. "The bunker has a hardwired, buried fiber optic line that runs 2 miles down the mountain, completely independent of the local grid. It cannot be jammed. It cannot be cut by the storm." I stopped breathing. 30 minutes ago, the moment the exterior door was locked, an automated distress beacon was sent directly to the county sheriff's dispatch, my father explained. Along with the distress beacon, it transmitted the live audio feed from the kitchen security cameras. They heard the threats. They heard the physical assault on my daughter. They heard you force her to lock the door. Marcus stumbled backward, hitting the kitchen island. His chest was heaving. "The plows aren't waiting out the storm, Marcus," my father said softly. "The sheriff deployed the heavy snowcats. They are already halfway up the mountain. You have about 20 minutes before they arrive. I suggest you pour yourself another glass of wine. It will be your last one for a very, very long time." The speaker clicked, hissed, and went dead. The silence that rushed back into the room was heavier than before. It was the crushing weight of absolute, inescapable reality. My father hadn't been backed into a corner. He had funneled Marcus into a trap, baiting him with the isolation, testing the structural integrity of his own daughter's loyalty, and waiting for the rat to snap the trap on itself. Marcus stood frozen in the dark. I watched his mind frantically trying to process the collapse of his entire life. The fraud, the embezzlement, the debt, and now, attempted murder and elder abuse. He was cornered, and a cornered animal is the most dangerous kind. Slowly, Marcus turned his head to look at me. The panic in his eyes was instantly replaced by a blinding, venomous rage. "You did this," he hissed, his voice trembling with fury. "Me?" I gasped, scrambling backward on the floor until my back hit the refrigerator. "You forced me. You threatened me." "They heard you lock the door, Chloe," he screamed, lunging across the kitchen. He grabbed me by the collar of my sweater, hauling me to my feet with terrifying strength. "You think they care that you were crying? You're an accomplice. You're going down with me. Let go of me," I thrashed, kicking wildly at his shins. He backhanded me across the face. The strike was so hard my vision flashed white. I collapsed against the counter, tasting copper in my mouth. "I am not going to rot in a cell because of your paranoid freak father," Marcus spat, frantically looking around the kitchen. "The snowcats are coming up the main road. I can take the snowmobile out the back. I can make it to the eastern ridge, hike down to the highway." He released me and began frantically tearing through his coat pockets, looking for the keys to my father's snowmobile. In his panicked frenzy, he pulled his hand out too fast. His sleek, expensive smartphone flew out of his pocket and clattered onto the hardwood floor, sliding to a stop inches from my knee. The impact woke the screen. In the dark room, the bright LCD display illuminated a text message notification that had just failed to send due to the lack of signal. It was stuck on the lock screen, bright and impossible to miss. Message to Sienna. "Babe, I got the old man cornered. Signatures tomorrow. The casino markers are due Friday, but I'll have the cash. Keep packing for Cabo. I love you." I stared at the glowing letters. The world stopped spinning. The howling of the wind seemed to fade into a dull, distant hum. Sienna, casino markers, Cabo, the debt, the hundreds of thousands of dollars that had supposedly been a tragic business failure, the cash flow friction he had used to justify destroying my life, threatening my freedom and murdering my parents. It wasn't a business failure. It was a gambling addiction. It was another woman. He had fabricated the entire threat of federal prison for embezzlement to force me into his nightmare. He was willing to let my mother suffocate in a concrete box so he could pay off a bookie and take his mistress to Mexico. The fear that had paralyzed me for months vanished. The terror of his manipulation, the dread of going to prison, the crushing guilt. It all evaporated, incinerated by a blinding, white-hot fury. "Give me the phone," Marcus demanded, dropping to his knees and reaching for the device. My hand shot out, grabbing the heavy cast-iron skillet my mother had left resting on the stove grate. As Marcus reached for the phone, I swung the iron skillet with every ounce of strength I had in my body. It connected with the side of his skull with a sickening hollow thwack. Marcus groaned, his eyes rolling back as he crumpled to the floor, stunned and bleeding. I didn't stop. I dropped the skillet, grabbed his collar, and dragged him violently toward the hallway. The adrenaline surging through my veins made me feel 10 feet tall. I was no longer the frightened, manipulated wife. I was the daughter of the man who built this house. I knew every inch of it. "You miserable, pathetic parasite!" I screamed, my voice tearing my throat. Marcus tried to scramble to his feet, disoriented, blood dripping from his temple. He swung a wild punch, catching me in the ribs. I stumbled back toward the top of the wooden staircase that led down to the mudroom. He lunged at me again, his hands reaching for my throat. But I didn't back away. I stepped inside his reach, grabbed the front of his expensive sweater, planted my foot squarely into his stomach, and threw my weight backward. I used his own forward momentum against him. I let go just as he tipped over the edge of the top step. Marcus let out a short, terrified yell as he tumbled backward into the dark. I heard the brutal, heavy thuds of his body hitting the solid oak stairs, one after another, until he crashed onto the slate tile of the mudroom floor at the bottom. He didn't get up. He just lay there, groaning, clutching his shattered leg. I stood at the top of the stairs, breathing heavily, wiping the blood from my mouth. The house was mine again. Suddenly, a brilliant, flashing sweep of red and blue light cut through the blizzard outside, painting the living room walls in frantic, strobing colors. The heavy, grinding roar of a county snowcat engine rattled the frosted window panes. The police were here. I didn't run to the front door. I didn't care about the cops. I turned and ran back to the kitchen, dropping to my knees in front of the heavy steel bunker door. "Dad!" I screamed, pounding my fists against the icy metal. "Dad, they're here. The police are here. Please open the door. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." The speaker above me crackled one last time. "Stand back, Chloe," my father's voice said gently. A moment later, the loud pneumatic hiss of the internal deadbolts retracting echoed through the floor. The heavy steel door swung inward, revealing the brightly lit, warm, pristine interior of the bunker. My father stood at the bottom of the stairs. He looked exactly the same as he had that morning, calm, steady, holding a flashlight he didn't even need. Behind him, sitting comfortably on a cot wrapped in a heated blanket, was my mother. She was breathing perfectly fine. She looked up at me, her eyes brimming with tears, not of fear, but of profound sorrow. 2 county sheriffs burst through the front door of the cabin a minute later, their flashlights cutting through the dark, their hands on their weapons. They found Marcus writhing on the mudroom floor, and they found me sitting on the top step of the bunker, sobbing into my father's coat. The rest of the night was a blur of flashing lights, radio static, and the biting cold of the blizzard. They hauled Marcus out on a stretcher, a deputy riding alongside him with handcuffs already shackled to his uninjured wrist. He didn't look at me as they rolled him past. He knew it was over. The audio recordings, the forged documents in his briefcase, the text messages on his phone, it was a slam-dunk case for the district attorney. He was looking at 20 years, minimum. I gave my statement to a detective in the back of a heated cruiser. I confessed to everything. I told them about the coercion, the threats, and the moment I slid the deadbolt. I didn't try to hide behind Marcus's manipulation. I owned my cowardice. I was ready to be arrested. I held my wrists out, fully expecting the cold steel of handcuffs. But the detective just closed his notepad, looked at me with a mixture of pity and weariness, and said, "Your father's lawyers have already spoken to the DA, ma'am. Given the extreme duress and the audio evidence of him threatening your life, they are declining to press charges against you for the lockdown. You're free to go." Free. The word felt like a physical blow. I wasn't free. I had chained myself to a lifetime of guilt. 2 days later, the storm had passed, leaving the mountains blanketed in a pristine, blinding white silence. I was sitting in the waiting room of the county hospital. My mother had been brought down for a routine checkup, just to ensure her lungs were completely clear after the stress of the weekend. I sat on a plastic chair, staring at the linoleum floor, a paper cup of cold coffee in my hands. I had nowhere to go. My bank accounts were frozen due to Marcus's fraud. The downtown apartment was already in foreclosure. I was 28 years old, utterly penniless, about to face a brutal divorce, and carrying the sickening knowledge that I had chosen a monster over my own family. The door to the examination room opened. My father walked out. He looked tired. The stoicism that had carried him through the weekend had finally cracked, revealing a very exhausted, aging man. He walked over and sat down in the plastic chair next to me. We sat in silence for a long time. "She's fine," he finally said, his voice rough. "Doctor says her oxygen levels are perfect." "I'm glad," I whispered, the tears immediately springing back to my eyes. "Dad, I don't know how to ask you to forgive me. I don't expect you to. I was so scared. I thought he was going to destroy me." My father sighed, a deep, heavy sound. He reached into the inner pocket of his flannel jacket and pulled out a thick manila envelope. He rested it on his knees, tracing the edge of the paper with his thumb. "I know you were scared, Chloe," he said softly, not looking at me. "But fear doesn't forge character. It reveals it. And it reveals where your true loyalties lie." I looked down, shame burning my cheeks. "6 months ago," my father continued, his voice dropping to a low, methodical cadence, "my bank alerted me to a discrepancy, a signature on a minor tax document that didn't match mine perfectly. I didn't confront Marcus. I didn't ask you. I hired a private investigator." My head snapped up. I stared at him, stunned. "I am an engineer, Chloe. I don't ignore stress fractures. I investigate them," he said, finally turning to look at me. His eyes were deeply sorrowful. "I knew about the gambling. I knew about the offshore accounts. I knew about the woman named Sienna in Belltown. I knew Marcus was drowning, and I knew he was going to try and drag you down with him." You knew?" I stammered, my mind reeling. "Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you warn me?" "Because you wouldn't have believed me," he said frankly. "You were under his spell. If I had shown you the photos, he would have spun a lie, and you would have cut us out of your life to protect him. I had to let the structure fail so you could see the rot for yourself." He picked up the manila envelope and held it out to me. My hands shook as I took it. "Open it," he instructed. I peeled back the metal clasp and pulled out a stack of crisp legal documents. They weren't the fraudulent papers Marcus had brought. They bore the seal of my father's actual attorney in Seattle. I read the title page, "The Chloe Whitmore Irrevocable Protection Trust." "When I found out about the debt Marcus had put in your name," my father explained quietly, "your mother and I sat down with our lawyers. We liquidated a portion of our retirement funds. We set up that trust. It contained exactly enough money to pay off every single fraudulent debt Marcus had tied you to hire the best divorce attorney in the state, and to buy you a small, safe house in the suburbs so you could start over, clean and free." I stared at the paper, my vision blurring with fresh tears. They hadn't just been waiting for the storm. They had been building a lifeboat for me the entire time. They loved me so much they were willing to empty their own safety nets to save me from my own catastrophic mistakes. "Dad," I choked out, covering my mouth with my hand. I don't deserve this." My father didn't smile. He didn't reach out to comfort me. He just looked at the envelope in my hands. "No," he said gently, but with a firmness that broke my heart into 1,000 pieces. "You don't." I looked up at him, confused. "Turn to page 4, he instructed softly. "Section 8, the morality clause." With trembling fingers, I flipped through the heavy pages until I found the section he was talking about. I read the legal jargon, my eyes scanning the highlighted paragraph. "This trust is entirely conditional upon the beneficiary, Chloe Whitmore, demonstrating loyalty and acting in the physical and financial best interests of the grantors, Robert and Martha Whitmore. Any act of hostility, coercion, or complicity in the endangerment of the grantors will immediately and irrevocably dissolve this trust, liquidating all assets directly to the Cascade Mountain Elder Care Charity Foundation." I stopped reading. The blood drained from my face. I looked at the date at the bottom of the page. The trust was set to activate and disperse the funds on Monday. Tomorrow. "We built you a lifeboat, Chloe," my father said, his voice thick with a grief I had never heard before. "All you had to do to get in it was stand by us. All you had to do, when Marcus told you to shut that door, was say no. If you had thrown the inhaler down the stairs, if you had fought him, if you had shown even a fraction of loyalty to the woman who gave birth to you, those lawyers would be handing you a check tomorrow morning to erase your debts." He stood up from the plastic chair. He looked down at me, a broken, penniless woman holding a worthless stack of papers that represented the salvation I had literally locked away. "But you slid the bolt," my father said quietly. "You chose him, and in doing so you voided the trust. The money is gone, Chloe. It was wired to the charity foundation an hour ago. You will have to face the bankruptcy, the creditors, and the divorce entirely on your own." I couldn't breathe. It wasn't about the money. It was about the profound, undeniable proof of my own failure. I had traded the deepest, most unconditional love in the world for a man who viewed me as collateral. And now I had neither. The door to the exam room opened again. My mother stepped out, looking frail but smiling softly. When she saw me crying, her instinct, as always, was to comfort. She walked over, placing a gentle hand on my shoulder. "Oh, sweetheart," she murmured. "It's over now. You're safe." I looked at my mother, the woman I had been willing to sacrifice, and then at my father, the man who had always been 3 steps ahead, building structures designed to survive the worst of human nature. They had forgiven me. I knew that. They were my parents, and their love was a foundation that even my betrayal couldn't entirely crack. They would still answer my calls. They would still invite me for Thanksgiving. But as I sat there, holding the voided trust documents, staring at the ruins of my life, I realized the hardest lesson of all. Forgiveness doesn't erase the consequences. My parents had survived the storm. The lodge in the mountains still stood, immovable and secure, entirely theirs. But I was standing out in the cold, a storm of my own making raging around me, and I had no one to blame but the woman who had reached out, grabbed the iron latch, and locked the door on her own salvation. The heavy steel deadbolt sliding into place is a sound I will never ever forget. Because every time the bank calls, every time I meet with my public defender for the divorce, every time I wake up alone in my cheap rented room, I hear that scrape. I hear that thud. And I remember exactly what it cost to betray the people who loved you first. The echo of that steel deadbolt didn't stop ringing in my ears when I left the hospital. It followed me into the darkest, most humiliating chapter of my life. If you think the story ends with the villain getting arrested and the parents being safe, then you haven't lived long enough to know how the real world works. Life doesn't roll credits just because the climax is over. The mess left behind still has to be cleaned up, and usually, the person holding the mop is the one who spilled the dirt. For the first 6 months, my life was a masterclass in absolute ruin. Without the parachute of my father's voided trust fund, I hit the concrete hard. Marcus's creditors didn't care that I was manipulated. They didn't care that he held me hostage in a mountain cabin. My signature was on the loans, the credit cards, and the offshore transfers he had used to fund his gambling and his mistress Sienna. I lost the downtown apartment within 30 days. I sold my wedding ring to pay for a bankruptcy lawyer who operated out of a strip mall next to a laundromat. I moved into a 200-square-foot studio apartment above a noisy 24-hour diner in a part of Seattle where the streetlights were mostly shattered. I got a job working the early shift at a commercial laundry facility, pulling heavy wet linens out of industrial washing machines until my hands bled and my back screamed. Every single paycheck went to the bankruptcy trustee. I ate ramen noodles. I walked 2 miles to work in the rain because I couldn't afford bus fare. And through it all, I didn't ask my parents for a single dime. My mother called every Sunday. She asked if I was eating, if I was warm. I lied and told her I was fine. My father rarely spoke on those calls, but I could hear his heavy breathing in the background, listening on the extension. I knew he was waiting for me to crack. He was waiting for me to beg for the lifeboat he had already burned. But I didn't. I had finally realized that asking for a handout was what got me into this nightmare in the first place. I had to build my own foundation, even if I was starting in the mud. The real test, however, didn't come from the creditors or the aching muscles. It came in a thick manila envelope taped to my apartment door in late October. It was a subpoena. The state of Washington versus Marcus Holloway. Marcus hadn't taken a plea deal. His defense attorney, a slick, expensive shark paid for by Marcus's wealthy enabler mother, was taking the case to trial. And their entire defense strategy rested on one horrifying premise. Chloe did it. They were going to argue that I was the mastermind, that I was the one desperate for the inheritance, that Marcus was simply a bystander who tried to stop his hysterical, greedy wife from locking her parents in a bunker. The trial began in mid-November. The courtroom was a grand, imposing space with high mahogany walls and rows of heavy wooden benches. It smelled of floor wax and old paper. When I walked through the double doors to take the witness stand, my heart hammered violently against my ribs. I hadn't seen Marcus in nearly 8 months. He was sitting at the defense table, wearing a perfectly tailored charcoal suit. He had lost weight, but he still had that arrogant, polished aura. The moment our eyes met, he gave me a slow, chilling smile. It was the same smile he had given me in the dark kitchen when he told me to slide the bolt. He was utterly confident he could destroy me again. Sitting in the gallery, right behind the defense table, was Sienna. She was young, blonde, and dripping in designer clothes that I had unknowingly paid for. She glared at me with absolute contempt. On the other side of the aisle sat my parents. My father wore a simple dark suit. My mother held his hand tightly. They looked older, more fragile, and seeing them sitting there because of my actions made my stomach twist with a sickening wave of nausea. The prosecutor, a sharp woman named Ms. Alvarez, walked me through the events of that weekend. I answered her questions clearly, fighting back tears as the audio recording from the kitchen was played for the jury. Hearing my mother's ragged breathing echoing through the courtroom made half the jury physically wince. Then it was the defense attorney's turn. He strutted up to the podium, adjusting his glasses, looking at me like I was a piece of dirt on his shoe. "Mrs. Holloway," he began, his voice dripping with condescension. "You expect this jury to believe that my client, a respected financial broker, suddenly turned into a cartoon villain and forced you to lock a heavy steel door?" "He did," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Isn't it true," the attorney pressed, leaning forward, "that you were the one facing severe financial ruin? Isn't it true that your name was on all the defaulted loans?" "My name was forged on those loans by my husband," I replied. "Convenient," he scoffed. "And isn't it true that your father's estate is worth over $2 million? An estate that you stood to inherit entirely as an only child?" "Yes." He paced in front of the jury box. "So we have a desperate, debt-ridden young woman who stands to inherit millions if her frail parents unfortunately pass away during a blizzard. And you want us to believe that when it came time to actually lock that bunker door, you were just a helpless victim following orders?" He stopped and pointed a perfectly manicured finger at me. "Who touched the door, Chloe? Who pushed the heavy steel shut?" "I did," I whispered. "I'm sorry, the jury didn't hear you," he snapped. "I did," I said a little louder. "And who grabbed the deadbolt? Who slid the metal bolt into place, sealing Robert and Martha Whitmore in what you thought was a freezing concrete tomb?" The courtroom was dead silent. I looked at Marcus. He was practically vibrating with smug victory. He thought he had me cornered again. He thought I would crumble, that I would cry and blame him, making myself look like a hysterical liar just like his lawyer wanted. But as I looked at him, I didn't feel fear. I felt the calloused, blistered skin of my own hands resting in my lap. I thought about the miles I had walked in the rain. I thought about the voided trust fund. I was done running from my own reflection. I turned my gaze away from Marcus and looked directly at the jury. "I did," I said. My voice was no longer a whisper. It was strong, clear, and carried to the back of the room. I pushed the door shut. I slid the bolt. The defense attorney smirked. "Thank you for your honesty, Mrs. Holloway. No further questions." "I'm not finished," I said loudly before he could turn away. The judge looked over her glasses at me. "The witness may complete her answer." I gripped the edges of the witness stand. I looked directly at the 12 men and women in the jury box. "I locked the door," I told them, my voice completely unwavering. "I committed an act of unspeakable betrayal against the 2 people who gave me everything. I let my husband manipulate me, terrorize me, and use my fear of prison to turn me into a monster. I was a coward. I was weak. I made the choice to save myself instead of protecting my mother, who was choking for air. and I will live with that agonizing shame every single day for the rest of my life. I paused, taking a deep breath, and finally turned my eyes to Marcus. His smug smile had completely vanished. But I am up here taking responsibility for my cowardice, I continued, my voice turning to steel. I am paying for my mistakes. I have lost my home, my savings, and my dignity, but Marcus Holloway hasn't taken responsibility for a single thing in his entire miserable life. He orchestrated the fraud. He brought the forged deed to the mountain. He threw my mother's inhaler across the room. He told me that if I didn't lock that door, he would break my father's neck. I pointed directly at him. I was a coward, yes, but that man is a predator. He built a trap, and when it snapped shut on him instead of us, he tried to use me as his shield one last time. I won't let him do it anymore. The courtroom erupted into a low murmur. The defense attorney scrambled to object, shouting about narrative testimony, but the damage was done. By owning my guilt completely, by refusing to play the innocent victim, I had stripped Marcus of his entire defense. The jury didn't see a mastermind on the stand. They saw a broken, deeply flawed woman who was finally telling the brutal, unvarnished truth. And next to my truth, Marcus's polished lies looked exactly like what they were: cheap and hollow. It took the jury less than 4 hours to deliberate. Guilty on all counts: attempted elder abuse, unlawful imprisonment, fraud, and coercion. As the judge read the verdict, Marcus collapsed into his chair. He didn't look polished anymore. He looked small. He looked terrified. When the bailiffs moved in to cuff him, he turned around, looking desperately at the gallery for Sienna. But Sienna wasn't there. She had slipped out of the courtroom the moment the prosecutor presented the bank records showing Marcus had secretly borrowed money against her car, too. He was completely, utterly alone. He was sentenced to 18 years in a state penitentiary. No early parole. When the trial was over, I walked out of the courthouse into the crisp Seattle rain. I didn't wait for my parents. I didn't want to intrude on their peace. I just put up the hood of my cheap raincoat and started the long walk back to the laundry facility. My shift started at 4. Time passed differently after the trial. The heavy, suffocating anxiety was gone, replaced by a quiet, monotonous grind. I finalized my divorce. I paid my monthly bankruptcy dues. I got promoted to floor manager at the laundry facility, which came with a tiny pay bump that allowed me to buy a battered 15-year-old sedan so I didn't have to walk in the rain anymore. A full year had passed since the weekend of the blizzard. It was a Saturday morning in late January. I woke up in my tiny apartment, made a cup of cheap instant coffee, and looked out the window. The sky was clear, cold, and blue. I grabbed my keys, walked down to my rusted car, and started driving. I didn't call ahead. I just drove the winding highway up into the Cascade Mountains. The snow had already blanketed the higher elevations, turning the world into a quiet frozen painting. When I pulled up to the long dirt driveway of my parents' lodge, my heart pounded just like it had in the courtroom. The massive log cabin stood tall and proud against the evergreens. Smoke was curling lazily from the stone chimney. I parked my car next to my father's heavy-duty truck. I sat in the driver's seat for a long time, gripping the steering wheel, terrified to get out. What if they didn't want to see me? What if the sight of my face just brought back the memory of that terrible scrape of the deadbolt? Before I could talk myself into putting the car in reverse, the heavy oak front door opened. My father stepped out onto the porch. He was wearing his usual flannel jacket and worn-in work boots. He stood at the edge of the steps, looking at my beat-up car. He didn't smile. He didn't wave. He just stood there, waiting. I turned off the engine, stepped out into the freezing mountain air, and walked slowly toward the porch. "Hi, Dad," I said quietly, stopping at the bottom of the wooden steps. "Chloe," he nodded. His eyes swept over me, taking in my cheap winter coat, my tired eyes, and the old car behind me. He saw the struggle. He saw the year of hard labor. "I didn't call," I said, my breath pluming in the cold air. "I'm sorry. If you and Mom want me to leave, I'll turn around right now. It's been a year. I wanted to see you." My father put his hands in his pockets. He looked out at the tree line for a moment, the quiet engineer calculating the weight of the moment. "The foundation on that car of yours sounds terrible," he finally said, his voice gruff. "Timing belt is whining." I blinked, surprised by the pivot. Yeah, I can't really afford to fix it right now." I just turned the radio up. My father slowly shook his head, a faint, almost imperceptible smirk touching the corner of his mouth. Never ignore a stress sound, Chloe, he said softly. It means the structure is asking for help. He pulled his hands out of his pockets and walked down the steps, stopping right in front of me. He looked at me, really looked at me, and for the first time in a year, I didn't see disappointment in his eyes. I saw respect. I read the transcripts from the trial, he said quietly. Your mother cried for 2 days, not because she was sad, but because she finally recognized the daughter she raised up on that witness stand. Tears immediately flooded my eyes. I looked down at my boots. You burned it all down, Chloe, my dad said, his voice thick with emotion. You let a bad man wreck the house. You locked us in the dark. I know, I sobbed quietly. I know. He reached out and placed a heavy, calloused hand on my shoulder. It was the warmest thing I had felt in a year. But you didn't ask me to rebuild it for you, he whispered. You got in the mud. You cleared the wreckage yourself. You're laying a new foundation. A real one this time. I looked up at him. He was crying too. The stoic, unbreakable engineer had tears rolling down his weathered cheeks. A good foundation takes time to cure, he said, pulling me into a tight, crushing hug. But once it sets, nothing can tear it down. Come inside, Chloe. Your mother made a pot roast. I buried my face in his shoulder, holding on to him as if he were the only solid thing left in the world. And in many ways, he was. We walked up the steps together. I paused at the top, looking down at the heavy mudroom floor where Marcus had fallen, and then toward the kitchen where the steel door to the bunker remained forever unlocked. The scars of that weekend would never truly fade. The memory of my betrayal would always be a ghost haunting the corners of this beautiful cabin. But ghosts only have power if you hide from them. I took off my coat, smelled the cinnamon and vanilla coming from the kitchen, and heard my mother's joyful, breathless voice calling my name. I wasn't a wealthy heiress. I wasn't the polished wife of a successful broker. I was a tired, broke 29-year-old woman working a minimum wage job. But as I walked into the warmth of the living room, surrounded by the walls my father built, I realized something profound. For the first time in my adult life, I was standing on solid ground.